Good morning, guys. Today we're going to be doing quadratic equations. Okay, remember equations that are quadratic. For an equation to be quadratic, it needs to have the highest degree of 2, meaning that the highest exponent in that equation must be equal to 2. Just to take you guys back to the previous definitions I gave you, remember, for you to have an equation, you need to have an equal sign where the left hand side will be equal to something on the right hand side. Okay, now let me just get to the definitions. A quadratic equation has the highest degree of 2. In certain examples, I will include cubic equations where the highest degree is 3. Now, the fact that you have the highest degree of 2, please note that it simply tells you that you need to have at least 2 solutions. I don't want to say at least because at times you'll only have one solution, especially where you have 2 identical solutions. It simply means that you only have one solution for that equation. Okay? Now solving for the equations, guys. First step, write the equation in standard form. This is the standard form of the equation where you have ax squared plus bx plus c. That is to make sure that on the left hand side you only have 0. So basically, if you don't have 0 on the right hand side or the left hand side, it doesn't matter where you put your equation, by the way. Then you need to find ways to simplify and to make sure that on one side you have 0. For now, guys, I'm just going to be working more on the left hand side. So I'll make sure that on the right hand side, I always have 0. I always have 0, and always make sure that the coefficient of x squared is positive. That a, make sure it's positive. If it's negative, get rid of that negative sign by multiplying all terms by that negative sign. Step number 2, factorize. We have done factorization thoroughly, guys, under simplification of quadratic expressions. You need to actually master your factorization. Equate each factor to 0, and I will actually show you guys. After factorization, obviously you have one factor multiplied with another factor. You will take those factors and equate them to 0, and after you've equated them to 0, you can now solve for x or y or a or b or whatever you've been asked to solve for. Okay, if the equation is already factorized and the factors are equated to 0, there is no need to break the brackets. Proceed to step 4. So you can jump certain steps, guys, if you don't need. There are certain steps that you don't need to do as they have already been done for you. I need you guys to highlight this. There is no need to break the brackets if the factors are equated to 0. I repeat, there is no need to break the brackets if the factors are equated to 0. However, if the factors are equated to another constant, guys, you need to break the brackets. Remember, guys, this criteria only applies if two factors are equated to 0. If they are not equated to 0, you break the brackets. You don't proceed to step 4 if they are not equated to 0. If they're equated to any other variable or if they're equated to any other constant, you do not proceed to step number 4. You have to actually go back to step number 1 and make sure that you write your equation as it is in step number 1. You always get 2 solutions, but I did specify, guys, at times you might get 1 solution, especially where you have 2 solutions but they are equal to the same number. Then in that case, it simply means there is only that 1 solution. Now, if A is multiplied by B, guys, this is common sense. If A is multiplied by B, remember the equal sign simply tells you that the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side. Now, under what circumstances can you multiply 2 factors and get a product that is equal to 0? Now I'm taking you to grade 8. Under what circumstances can you multiply 2 or 3 factors and get a product of 0? You can only get a product of 0 if one or both or 3 of those factors are equal to 0. Okay, so one of those factors must be equal to 0. Let me just say at least one of those factors must be equal to 0 for you to have a product that is equal to 0. That is why here, guys, when you have two factors that are multiplied and the answer is equal to 0, you're going to take each factor and simply equate it to 0. So if I have A multiplied by B is equal to 0, it's either A must be equal to 0 or B must be equal to 0, or both of them must be equal to 0. So this step actually applies, number 6 applies to step number 3, okay, where we need to equate each factor to 0. Now let's do examples quickly. What are factors? I'm simply taking you guys back to grade 8 again. Factors are simply things. I don't want to say things, I hate using things, but it's just things that are multiplied. In this case, guys, I have a monomial which is 2x, which is multiplied by a binomial inside that bracket, which is x minus 2 is equal to 0. So basically I have two factors that have been multiplied. I know some of you might say, but there's 2 as well. I don't want you to worry much about coefficients that are integers. Even coefficients that are not integers, even if they are variables, when you are solving for x, you will simply look at x as part of the factors. Okay, now in this case I'm going to take that 2x equated to 0, and I'm going to take x minus 2 and equate it to 0, because for me to have a product that is equal to 0, one of the two has to be equal to 0. And now I can start solving for x. In the first factor, where I have 2x equals, obviously I took that factor and I equated it to 0. For me to solve for x there, I'm simply going to divide both sides by 0. Therefore, I will have x is equals to 0 divided by 2. And what is 0 divided by 2? 0 divided by 2 is simply 0. Okay, and if I have x minus 2 is equals to 0, it means that I will have x is equal to 2. So here is my answer. X is equals to 0 and x is equal to 2. What about here where I have x minus 3, which is multiplied by x plus 4? I'm going to take each factor, because I have a binomial multiplied by a binomial here. I'm going to take each factor and equate it to 0. Our first factor is x minus 3. I'm going to take that and equate it to 0. Our second factor will be x plus 4. I'm going to take that and equate it to 0. Because those two factors, when I multiply them, one of them has to be equal to 0, because my product is 0. Okay, now hence here, guys, I'm simply going to say x minus 3 is equals to 0 and x plus 4 is equals to 0. For me to solve for x, I will simply take 3 to the other side. Remember, guys, whenever 3 jumps the equal sign, whenever any term jumps the equal sign, its sign must change. I did explain the rules under linear equations. Okay, now that 3, when it moves to the right hand side, it will be positive. That is why we have x is equals to 3, and with respect to x plus 4, if I take that 4 to the right hand side, because it is positive, when it jumps that equal sign, or when it's transposed to the right hand side, it will be negative. That is why I have x is equal to minus 4. So I have two solutions here. X is equals to 3 and x is equals to minus 4. What about here, guys? How many factors do I have that are multiplied, and what is my product? I have two factors, which is 2x minus 1 and 5x plus 4. So I'm going to take them and equate each to 0. Now, for me to be able to solve for x in the first equation, now I have two equations, which are two linear equations, guys. I'm going to transpose 1 to the right-hand side, and that 1 will be positive. In the second linear equation, I'm going to transpose 4 to the right-hand side, and that 4 will be negative, and I will be left with this. For me to solve for x in the first equation, I'm going to divide both sides by 2. In the second equation, for me to be able to solve for x, I will divide both sides by 5. By so doing, I will have my x solutions. The first x solution is half, and the second x solution is minus 4 over 5. Now, this is the example that I told you about, where we will not have a quadratic equation. Instead, we will have a cubic equation. In this case, guys, I will explain later why I say this is a cubic equation. In this case, I have 3 factors. The first factor is x. The second factor will be x minus 2. The third factor will be x plus 3. So I'm going to take each of those factors and equate them to 0. I will have x is equals to 0, and the second factor will give me a linear equation, which is x minus 2 is equals to 0, and the third factor, when I equate it to 0, it will also give me a linear equation, which is x plus 3. Now, for the second linear equation, for me to solve for x, then I'm going to transpose negative 2 to the right hand side, and that negative 2, when it moves to the right hand side, when I transpose it to the right hand side, it will be positive, and when I transpose 3 to the right hand side, it will be negative 3. So I will have this solution. By so doing, guys, I have now solved for x. Now we're going to be doing more quadratic equations where we need to factorize first before equating our vectors. We will do this shortly.